That evening started like any other evening in his life. Nothing special, nothing planned. He had finished his work late, his mind tired, his body moving on habit more than intention. The city around him was loud, but familiar cars passing, people talking, lights glowing in shop windows. He often walked this route, usually lost in his own thoughts, replaying worries about work, money, and the quiet feeling that something was missing in his life. Though he could never explain what that something was, he stopped at a small place where people often gathered after long days. It was not fancy, just comfortable. A place where strangers shared space without really knowing each other. He stood there for a moment, checking his phone, waiting for his order, not expecting anything unusual to happen. That was when he noticed her dot at first. It wasn't her beauty that caught his attention. It was her presence. She stood slightly apart from everyone else, not lonely, but self-contained. Like she was there, yet also somewhere else. She moved slowly, carefully, as if she was studying the world instead of being part of it. Her eyes were alert, curious, almost cautious. She looked around as if everything was new to her, even the smallest details people usually ignored. He told himself not to stare. He wasn't the kind of person who approached strangers easily. He believed people should mind their own business. But something about her made that difficult. It felt strange, almost unsettling, like noticing a quiet sound in a noisy room that you can't unhear once you've noticed it. When she turned slightly, the light caught her face, and that was when he felt it, a sudden pause inside his chest. She was beautiful, yes, but not in a way that felt rehearsed or obvious. There was something raw and natural about her, like she hadn't tried to impress anyone. Her beauty felt accidental, effortless. It made him uncomfortable because it reminded him of how rarely he allowed himself to feel anything deeply anymore. He looked away, telling himself it was nothing. Just another person. Just another moment that would pass. But his mind didn't move on. His thoughts circled back to her again and again. He wondered who she was, where she came from, why she carried herself like someone visiting a place for the first time. People around them laughed, talked loudly, complained about their day. She didn't join in. She listened. When someone spoke to her, she responded politely, but briefly, as if words were tools she used carefully, not casually. That made him think of her as different. Not better, just different. In his mind, without meaning to, he gave her a quiet nickname, the Alien Princess. Not because she wasn't human, but because she felt like she belonged to a world slightly out of reach. He finally received his order, but instead of leaving, he stayed. He stood there longer than needed, unsure why. He told himself it was just tiredness, but deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Something inside him wanted to understand this feeling, this sudden pull toward a stranger. Then it happened. Their eyes met. It was brief, only a second or two, but it felt longer. He expected her to look away quickly, like most people do. She didn't. She looked at him directly, calmly, without curiosity or judgment. Just awareness. That simple look made him feel seen in a way he wasn't prepared for. His throat tightened. His mind went blank. He felt foolish. He wasn't young anymore. He had lived enough to know better than to let a moment shake him like this. And yet, there he was, standing still, heart beating faster than it should. She turned back to what she was doing, and the spell broke. He took a breath, trying to laugh it off in his own head. But his hands felt slightly unsteady. He realized something uncomfortable. He wanted to say something to her. He argued with himself. What would he say? Why would he say anything at all? People didn't just talk to strangers anymore, especially not like this. It could be awkward. It could be misunderstood. He didn't want to seem rude or strange, but another thought pushed back, quieter yet stronger. If he walked away now, this would become just another moment he would replay later, wondering what might have happened if he had been brave for once. He waited until the space between them felt natural, not forced. When she stepped aside, he found himself standing closer than before. His heart raced. He opened his mouth to speak, and nothing came out. He had rehearsed polite sentences in his head. Simple ones. Safe ones. But they disappeared the moment he faced her again. She looked up, her expression open, waiting. That silence stretched longer than he wanted. And then, without planning it, without filtering it, the truth slipped out. He told her, quietly but clearly, "You're so beautiful, I can't speak." The words surprised even him. They weren't smooth. They weren't clever. They were raw and honest, spoken before fear could stop them. The reaction was immediate. She stopped moving. It wasn't the kind of stop people do when they're confused or uncomfortable. It was complete stillness, like time had paused around her. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. She didn't smile. She didn't laugh. She just stood there, frozen. He felt panic rise in his chest. Had he crossed a line? Had he made her uncomfortable? He rushed to explain, already regretting everything. But before he could say another word, he noticed something unexpected. Her expression wasn't angry or offended. It was shocked, yes, but also soft. Almost fragile. Like something inside her had been touched without warning. She swallowed, looking away for a brief second, as if steadying herself. When she looked back at him, her eyes were different, warmer, more human, less guarded. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, life continued as usual. People moved, laughed, complained, checked their phones. No one else noticed this small, quiet moment that felt huge to both of them. He realized then that this wasn't just about beauty. It was about being seen. About someone saying something real in a world full of safe, empty words. He didn't know who she was, or what she carried inside her. He didn't know why his words had stopped her like that. All he knew was that something had shifted for her. And for him, that simple sentence, spoken without a plan, had opened a door neither of them had expected. And as she stood there, still processing what he had said, he understood one thing clearly. This was no longer just an ordinary evening. It was the beginning of a moment that would stay with him long after they walked away. He didn't expect her to speak immediately. The pause felt longer than it should, and yet it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that made him notice small things, how her fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table, how the light fell across her hair, how her eyes seemed to search for something beyond the room. It was the kind of silence that made words seem unnecessary, as if the moment itself was enough. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. "That was unexpected," she said. There was no anger in her tone, no teasing, no mockery, just honesty. Her words didn't feel rehearsed. They felt real. And that made him feel even more nervous. Real words demanded real courage. He swallowed hard, unsure how to respond, realizing he had never felt this kind of vulnerability before, not from a stranger. Not in so many years. "I didn't mean to," he started, but she shook her head slightly. "No, it's okay. It's just rare. People don't usually say things like that, especially not to someone they don't know." He nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. She wasn't rejecting him. She wasn't judging him. She was just acknowledging him. And that acknowledgement felt heavier than any compliment he had ever received. There was honesty in her voice, a kind of quiet truth that made him aware of how artificial most of his interactions had been. He realized that he often spoke without thinking, said polite things without feeling them. And now, in front of her, words had real power. Why rare? He asked softly, The question came out of curiosity more than intention. He wanted to understand her. Not just her beauty, not just the shock he had caused, but who she really was beneath the surface. She paused again, and he could see her thinking, weighing whether she should answer. Finally, she said, "Because people usually look without seeing. They notice the surface. But words that are honest, they make you stop. They make you feel exposed." Her words struck him in a way he didn't expect. Exposed. That was exactly how he had felt when he saw her. And now he realized that she must feel the same way every time someone really looks at her. He wanted to tell her that she didn't need to be afraid, that she didn't need to hide, but even thinking, it made his chest tighten. How do you explain to someone that a single sentence can create a bridge between two people who have never met before? He stayed quiet, letting her speak first. She seemed to appreciate that. After a moment, she continued, "It's strange. Most people talk to fill space, to distract themselves. But your words, they didn't do that. They made space. And in that space, I could feel something." She hesitated, and he could sense the careful thought behind every word. It wasn't small talk. It was truth. Something like, "What?" He asked, his voice lower than before. He didn't want to pressure her. He just wanted to understand. "Connection," she said finally. "A moment where it feels like someone sees you. Not just your face or your smile, but the part of you that people usually ignore. That part of you that's complicated, maybe messy, maybe fragile. That's the part that matters most." He felt a lump in his throat. Connection. That was exactly what he had felt when he first saw her. And he realized something important. It wasn't just her beauty that stopped him. It was the feeling that she was someone who had lived in a world that didn't notice her, that didn't understand her. And somehow, without even trying, she made him feel seen too. For a few minutes, they didn't speak at all. He watched her as she sipped her drink carefully, deliberately. She didn't rush. She didn't fidget. She just existed, and in her existence, there was a kind of quiet strength that he admired. Not the loud, obvious kind of strength that people notice easily, but the kind that holds itself together, even when no one is watching. He wondered what her life had been like. He could see that she wasn't someone who had always been surrounded by people who truly understood her. Maybe she had always felt different, always been cautious about letting anyone too close. And yet, here she was, allowing herself to be seen by a complete stranger. That courage surprised him more than her beauty had. "Do you always feel like this?" he asked finally, his words tentative. "Like different?" She looked at him thoughtful. "Most of the time, yes. People expect certain things from you. They expect you to behave a certain way, to smile when it's convenient, to hide what makes you uncomfortable. And if you don't, you feel alone, misunderstood, alien in a way." She paused, and he realized she had just described exactly what he had imagined when he first called her the alien princess in his mind. But she wasn't offended. She seemed almost relieved that someone had noticed without judgment. "I see," he said softly. I think that's why your reaction surprised me too. Because I felt the same way for a moment. Seeing you, it was like seeing something real in a world full of things pretending to be real." She smiled, small and quiet, not a dazzling grin, but one that carried weight. "Then maybe we're not so different after all." He laughed softly, a little awkwardly, because the words felt heavier than they should. He didn't know how to explain that it was rare for him to meet someone who made him feel seen and understood in the same moment. Most people he talked to only saw the surface, only exchanged the polite words that made life move forward. But here, in this small, ordinary place, with ordinary people all around, he had found something extraordinary. Honesty, vulnerability, and a connection that didn't demand anything, yet gave everything. The conversation continued, slowly, naturally. They didn't rush, didn't push. They talked about small things at first, what they liked to eat, the music they listened to, the small routines that made up daily life. But even these small details felt different, because they were sharing them with someone who was truly listening. She didn't just nod and smile politely. She asked questions. She noticed the way he hesitated, the way his hands moved, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about something he cared about. And he noticed the same about her. It was strange how quickly a connection could form between two people who had never met before. But it wasn't romantic in a rushed way. It wasn't about desire. It was about recognition, about noticing someone's humanity and having that recognition returned in full. And in that recognition, there was comfort. There was safety. There was trust that didn't need to be earned overnight. At some point, he realized they had been talking for over an hour, though it had felt like minutes. The world outside the little space continued as always, oblivious to the quiet miracle happening inside. People came and went, laughed, shouted, argued over small things. But here, in this tiny corner, two people had stopped. Two people had paused the rush of life to notice something real. She looked at him, her expression softening. "I didn't expect tonight to be like this," she said. Her voice was gentle, not rehearsed, not cautious, honest. He smiled back quietly because he felt the same. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But I'm glad it was." For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply existed in the quiet, a silence that didn't demand anything, a silence that allowed them to feel the weight and warmth of the moment. He realized that some experiences in life couldn't be explained with clever words or stories. Some experiences were simply meant to be felt, and in that moment, he knew that what had started with a simple, raw sentence, "You're so beautiful, I can't speak," had become something more, something deeper, something neither of them could have planned, yet both of them felt completely. It wasn't a love story. Not yet, maybe not ever. But it was a story of being seen, of recognition, of two people meeting and finding that, in a vast and often indifferent world, they weren't entirely alone. As the evening slowly ended and people began leaving the place, he felt a quiet sense of gratitude. For her, for the courage it had taken to stop, for the honesty that had passed between them. And for himself, for the courage it had taken to speak the truth without fear. They didn't exchange numbers or make promises. They didn't plan to meet again. But as he walked away later that night, he realized that it didn't matter. The moment had happened. And moments like that, moments of truth, recognition, and humanity were rare, precious, life-changing in ways that didn't always show immediately. But that stayed with you forever, and somewhere in the quiet corners of their minds, both of them knew that they would carry the memory of this encounter for a long time. A memory of honesty, of vulnerability, of being seen. A memory that, in its own quiet way, changed the way they looked at the world, and at themselves. After that night, life went back to its usual rhythm. The streets, the shops, the constant rush of people, it all felt the same. Yet for him, something had shifted. The memory of her presence lingered, not in a distracting way, but quietly, like a song that hummed softly in the background, making ordinary moments feel sharper, brighter, more meaningful. He thought about her often, not obsessively, not with longing, but with curiosity and a strange kind of respect. He wondered if she had felt the same, that brief, almost magical recognition that connected them, even though they were strangers. He replayed their conversation in his mind countless times. Her words, her silence, the way she had paused after his simple compliment, all of it stayed vivid, as if she had left a small mark on the world that only he could see. He started noticing small things differently. A smile from a stranger on the street, the way light hit a window in the afternoon, the quiet moments when people paused and looked around instead of rushing. Life had always gone on, but now he felt more aware of it, more alive to its little details. And somewhere inside him, he knew that meeting her had reminded him of something he had almost forgotten, that life was made of real moments, not just routines and obligations. Days passed. Weeks passed. He went to the same places he always went, spoke to the same people he always spoke to, yet nothing felt entirely the same. Every time he walked through that small shop where he had first seen her, he glanced around, half expecting, half hoping to see her again. He never did. But that absence was not disappointing. It was quietly comforting, in a way that reminded him of the night they had shared. The moment itself was enough. He realized something else, too. He hadn't felt fear in a long time, not real fear, the kind that comes with honesty. That night, he had spoken without planning, without rehearsing, without pretending. And though he had been terrified for a second, he had survived. More than that, he had created something meaningful. He had shown courage, and in return, he had been rewarded, not with love or attention, but with recognition. Being seen, being acknowledged, feeling human in the most human way possible. And then, slowly, he started thinking about her life. He wondered if she ever told anyone else about the night they met, if she thought about him at all, or if he had just been a passing shadow in her evening. He realized that part of the beauty of that moment was that it didn't need continuation to matter. It existed in its own completeness. Sometimes, life gives you experiences that are brief but powerful, and their value doesn't depend on repetition. One evening, he sat quietly by a window in his apartment, looking out at the city. The sky was fading from orange to deep blue. The lights were turning on in the buildings across the street. He thought about the night they had met, about her words, about the way her eyes had met his. And he smiled not because he was happy in the usual sense, not because he expected anything from life, but because he understood something he hadn't before, that moments of connection are rare, and when they happen, they can change you forever. He remembered how she had described herself as different, as alien in a world that didn't notice her. And he realized that he had felt the same way in his own life. Most people don't stop to notice others, to see them as they truly are. Most people rush past, distracted by their own thoughts, their own problems, their own lives. But in her presence, for that brief time, he had felt seen. And he had seen her. That was extraordinary. That was rare. That was life in its purest form. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he could still hear her voice. The quiet way she spoke, thoughtful and careful, but full of honesty. He could see the small gestures she made, the way her fingers brushed against the table, the way she held her cup, the subtle movements that made her uniquely herself. These small details, so easy to miss, had left an imprint on him. They reminded him that real connection isn't about big gestures or grand declarations. It's about noticing, about presence, about truth. And he realized something else. That night had taught him to appreciate people in a new way. He began to notice the stories behind everyone he met, even strangers. The tired parent waiting for a bus, the cashier smiling politely, the old man feeding pigeons in the park. He imagined their lives, their hidden feelings, their unspoken experiences. It was as if meeting her had opened his eyes to the humanity in everyone. He also began to understand that beauty is not just about appearance. It's about presence, about honesty, about courage, about being seen without pretense. She had been beautiful in every sense, not just visually, but in the way she existed, the way she communicated, the way she carried herself. And in seeing her, he began to recognize similar beauty in the world around him. in people he had overlooked before. One day, months later, he found himself back at that same small shop. He walked in slowly, casually, pretending he wasn't hoping to see her. The place was busy, filled with chatter and movement, and yet he felt a familiar quiet inside him. He realized he didn't need to see her again to appreciate what had happened. The memory of that night was enough. The lesson, the connection, the truth, they weren't bound to her presence anymore. They were part of him now. As he left the shop, he thought about the way life works. How grief encounters can leave lasting impressions. How words spoken honestly can create ripples far beyond the moment. How being brave enough to speak the truth, even in small ways, can open doors that had been closed for years. He understood finally that life is full of these tiny miracles. Not the kind that make headlines or change the world at large, but the kind that change a person's world quietly, deeply, invisibly. The kind that remind you that even in a busy, indifferent city, there are moments of real connection. Moments where someone sees you for exactly who you are, and in doing so, changes the way you see yourself. And he carried that lesson with him every day. He spoke more honestly, noticed more carefully, listened more deeply. He smiled at strangers not just out of politeness, but with attention. He allowed himself to feel small moments of joy, surprise, and wonder without guilt or doubt. Sometimes he would walk past that same place, hoping, not for her, but for another moment like that, another connection, another glimpse of truth, another experience that reminded him that life is more than routines and obligations. And sometimes he would pause for a second, take a deep breath, and remember that quiet evening when the world had stopped for just a moment, and a stranger's words had broken through the ordinary. And in remembering, he felt gratitude. Gratitude for the courage it had taken to speak honestly. Gratitude for her courage in stopping and being seen. Gratitude for a world that, though often indifferent, could still surprise him with moments of beauty and truth. Life went on, as it always does. People moved, stories unfolded, days passed. But he knew one thing. That night had changed him forever. Not in obvious ways, not with grand gestures or dramatic turns, but quietly, internally, in the way he perceived life, in the way he valued connection, in the way he understood beauty, courage, and truth. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the city, maybe she thought about him too. Maybe she remembered the night. Maybe she, like him, carried that small, extraordinary memory with her, letting it remind her that the world could notice her, that people could see her, and that sometimes honesty was enough to change everything. It was not a love story in the usual sense. It was a story of recognition, of humanity, of connection. And it was rare and precious and unforgettable. A story that lived not in the grand events of life, but in a single evening, in the courage of a few simple words, and in the hearts of two people who had stopped, just for a moment, to truly see each other. And for him, that was enough.